is Kevin Yee, and I've been a youth pastor for over 18 years, working with middle school and high school students in a Korean American immigrant church context here in Los Angeles. And in this video, we're going to be focusing on how we go about finding a mentor. Whether you're just starting out in ministry or have been in the trenches for many years, everyone could benefit from having a mentor. It's always helpful to know someone who's ahead of where we are, who can guide and lead us through our questions and struggles. While on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's all that difficult to find someone who can mentor us, the truth is, for many of us in youth ministry, and especially those of us in the Asian American context, it can be surprisingly difficult to find a mentor. Now, before we get to the task of finding a mentor, we need to have some foundational questions answered in order to find out what kind of mentor we need. It's very rare to find someone that can offer us all the wisdom that we need for all of our circumstances, so we'll have much more success if we first understand what kind of help we need. We can't get the answers we need unless we're thinking very carefully about the kinds of questions we should be asking. This kind of pre-mentoring work is going to be critical in setting ourselves up for success. Have you ever noticed how often God asks questions? In the book of Genesis, after Adam and Eve took the forbidden fruit and ate it in the Garden of Eden, how does God approach them? He looks for them with a question, "Where are you?" The next three things that God says are also questions. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? What is this you have done? We know that God knows the answers to these questions, so why does he ask them? Because questions are an invitation into relationship. Though we often attribute God's first grace to Adam and Eve, in the pronouncement that Eve would be the mother in the midst of learning about the consequences of their sin, I actually believe that God's grace is first evident in the way that he asks them questions, inviting Adam and Eve into conversation about what they did. Later on in the New Testament, Jesus himself would constantly and consistently be asking questions all throughout the gospel narratives. This is consistent with the character of God. So just as God uses questions as a gracious form of invitation, with some processing, we can actually learn how to do the same. For the sake of time, we're going to think about our questions in sort of three broad topics. There's suggestions for more topics in the PDF worksheet that you have, but we're going to take the next few minutes to think about the kinds of questions that we need to have answered in these three specific topics. First, let's think through youth ministry related questions. These are going to be questions like, how do I build a team? How should I structure my youth ministry? What kinds of programming do I need? What kind of discipleship works best in my context? What's the balance between Bible study and relational activities? What should a vision for youth ministry actually look like? And then second, we're actually going to think through identity-related questions, questions about ourselves. What are my talents and gifts? What am I naturally gifted at? What kind of leader am I? What are my blind spots? What are my own values for ministry? What's important to me as a youth worker? These identity-related questions are going to be really important in knowing ourselves. And then lastly, we want to think about our specific church and our specific church context-related questions. Questions such as, what is the culture of the church I'm in? What is actually expected of me? What kinds of limitations and boundaries do I need to be aware of? What's the leadership structure of our church? Who do I report to, and who's keeping me accountable for what's going on in youth ministry? Let's take a moment to pause the video and brainstorm questions under these three topics. Welcome back. I hope that the brainstorming session was really productive and fruitful. Let's take some time to think about who we can be approaching about these questions now. And I want to take some time to address ministry context. Some of us are in immigrant church contexts like I am, where language and culture are real barriers to mentorship. Simply put, if you are an English-speaking second or third generation Asian American, finding a first generation Asian American to help you is going to be pretty challenging unless you're fluent in the culture and language. But don't despair. If there isn't help in your immediate church, There's a good chance that there are some pastors or leaders in your city or your community that can help you navigate or connect you with others that are in the same cultural context as you. Now, if you don't know of anyone that can help you with these connections, reaching out to a larger organization like the Asian American Christian Collaborative could be very, very helpful. But more often than not, there are usually a handful of first-generation people that can speak English well enough to help you navigate the bulk of your questions. Trying to seek out who these people are and getting to know them at a deeper relational level is really important. I personally have been fortunate enough to have many such members in my own church, and those relationships have been incredibly rich and rewarding. Forging relationships with these members is the key to longevity in ministry. So now let's think about the kind of mentor we need. On one hand, finding someone who is godly and a little bit further than you in life, that's just great general advice. But since you've done the work of thinking through some specific questions that you want and need answers to, let's think about who can help us get the answers that we need. So first, is there someone that immediately comes to mind when it comes to your youth ministry related questions? Is there someone locally or even someone that you might not know across, social media, for example, that you might think would be someone that could help you with your questions? Okay, take a minute to write down some names. Next, let's take a look at your identity questions. Who are the people that come to mind to help you process through these questions about yourself? It may be that the person that's best suited to help you with your youth ministry related questions, they're not necessarily the best person to help you with your identity or church related questions. This is something to recognize about mentorship. There is no one-stop shop for mentoring. We all need a variety of leaders to help us grow in a variety of ways. As the Apostle Paul says, the body of Christ is made up of many members, and we have much to learn from so many of the different kinds of people at our churches. So, there was one megachurch pastor who actually claimed that he couldn't be mentored by anyone who had a church smaller than him. I think this kind of thinking ultimately failed him, but we can make the same mistake. The truth is, we minister best from our weakness as Christ is magnified in our humility. So let's go ahead and take a few minutes to jot down some names. For your church-related questions, you'll probably need to seek out someone who has been serving in your church for some time. Ask them about the history of the church and what they've seen the Lord do while they've been a church member. Especially if you're new in your church context, taking a moment to ask about the history of the church and legacy of the church is going to be important in recognizing that you're joining a whole series of saints along the way that God is using for His kingdom. And with this greater context, you'll be much wiser in how you approach change and talking about vision and values for your youth ministry. Getting this right is a difference between people being able to trust in you and following you or viewing you as an outsider. Far too often, I see church leaders come into a church, and because they don't understand why things are the way they are, they're like a bull in a china shop, just sort of tearing down all the things that they don't like. All the things that they think are wrong, but they never really understood why things are done the way that they are. The truth is, sometimes inefficiencies are actually markers of love and grace in the history of a church. For example, at our church, we actually make kimchi for our weekly Sunday congregational lunches. So every 3 months, we gather on Thursday afternoon with about 50 people to wash, chop, and marinate Napa cabbage to make 250 gallons of kimchi. It's backbreaking work, and I've done it enough times to wonder why we do this gigantic factory-like production. Why not just buy kimchi like every other normal church? But every 3 months, I see the people that gather for this work and the joy that it gives them, and I know that they're serving in such a simple way, but it's contributing to our church body in a really profound way. Now that we've identified the questions and thought about who we want to ask, we should talk about how we make the ask. By the way, I hope that you feel empowered to know what to ask and who to ask. It's good to have a vision for yourself when searching out a mentor. Also, right now, hopefully, you're empowered to reach out to somebody with a very specific ask. This is crucial for asking someone for their time. Many leaders often want to give their time to younger leaders, but it's really hard to say yes to an open-ended, will you be my mentor kind of ask. Think about it this way. If you're interested in dating someone, you don't ask them for a 6-month commitment. That's way too intimidating. You instead ask for something much more casual, a lunch or a coffee or a boba date or a tea. Because it's so much more manageable, low-key, it comes with less risks and time commitments. The same goes for mentoring. The more direct and low-key they ask, the greater the chance of something to grow from that. So let's take a moment here to write a sample message asking for mentorship. For this exercise, let's use a youth ministry related question. So choose something that you think would be a great question to ask someone further along from you in youth ministry, and go ahead and write a sample polite and professional message inviting them to a coffee or tea or a video chat or even a phone call. Once you set up a time to meet with a potential mentor, think about some other questions you might have for this particular person. It never hurts to have some extra follow-up questions, and if you still have questions at the end of your first meeting, you have a reason to ask them for a follow-up. Now, if these follow-up meetings go well, you probably have enough relational capital to ask this person to be a regular mentor for you, to check in with you from time to time and to see how you're doing. And as a mentee who is getting their questions answered, you're receiving so much from your mentor. But your mentor is also receiving much from you as they can see that they're making an impact and a difference in your life. And this is ultimately what's going to lead to a really, really successful mentoring relationship. Lastly, in addition to membership, you need to get feedback. One thing that I think is really crucial for the Asian American youth worker in particular is the fact that we do a lot of preaching. Because so many of us serve in contexts where we basically run our own Sunday services that are concurrent with the adult Sunday service, we're preaching and teaching very regularly. How many of us know our personality quirks and patterns of speech when we preach and teach? Perhaps during and after the pandemic, you've had to record or live stream your own preaching and your services. Watching these sermons, as hard as they are, they can be really, really helpful in seeing ourselves as others do. So be your own worst critic, take some notes, and see what areas you can improve on. Not just in structure and form of the content, but actually how you deliver the sermon is crucially important as well. If you're married like me, asking your spouse to sit in on your messages and offer real feedback is so critical. If I'm honest, my wife is still my greatest encourager and critic, and she's provided me with so much helpful feedback. Now, if you're not married, that's okay. You have another trusted youth leader that can give you feedback. Ask them for it. It may hurt your pride, but you're not really the center of your ministry, right? Now, I do want to caution you about getting feedback from your students. While I think students have so much to offer in terms of feedback, we need to be careful to maintain some boundaries. Early on in my ministry, I made the mistake of believing that because the students remembered my messages and sermons better when there was a lot of humor in them, I utilized the tool of humor to a fault. And I often pointed the students to me, the messenger, rather than to Jesus, the point, right? And there's nothing more that I regret than taking that focus off of Jesus. And so we really need to be careful. Lastly, I want to encourage you in the Lord. Ultimately, as a youth worker, we have the greatest mentor in God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Knowing the word of the Lord deeply, seeing Christ in every part of the scriptures will guide you through more ministry issues than any one person could provide you with guidance. In Ephesians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul prays for the Ephesians in this way, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have the strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. My prayer for you is the same, that you would be filled with the love of Christ as your mentor above all. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this was really helpful in setting you up for success in finding a mentor.